Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Today we continue on with our Clone Wars history series. In our last episode, we did an in-depth coverage of the duel on Geonosis between Count Dooku and the Jedi. Today we continue on with what happens immediately after the Battle of Geonosis, focusing specifically on the adventures of Mace Windu. Chapter 1. Back to Naboo. After Yoda saves Anakin and Obi-Wan Kenobi, the Master and the Padawan are sent back to Coruscant for medical treatment. Anakin would receive treatment from the chief healer Vakara Che in the Halls of Healing, and receive a new mechano arm. This was a thing of beauty, a custom prosthetic crafted by the finest artisans in the Republic. Later, when Anakin would become Vader, he would notice how much lower quality his new prosthetics were compared to the one he received after Geonosis. When Anakin is in a healing trance, Padme comes to the temple and demands to see him. The two had professed their love for each other before entering the Geonosian execution arena. Padme's appearance at the temple further increased Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi's suspicion that Anakin was romantically involved with the Senator. It doesn't really take much to connect the dots, really. Anakin was assigned to be Padme's personal bodyguard for some time. They had nearly died several times in each other's arms, and when Padme falls out of the LAAT over Geonosis, Anakin clearly shows that his feelings for Padme goes beyond just a professional relationship. Obi-Wan Kenobi asks Padme to end her relationship with Anakin. She responds by asking Obi-Wan to allow Anakin to escort her back to Naboo, where she will break up with him. For some reason, Disney canon wants us to believe that the Jedi Order has no idea that Anakin and Padme are in love. I've always thought that this was kind of ridiculous, especially because we know that Jedi are very sensitive to other people's feelings. I mean, they could basically read other people's emotions. Obi-Wan Kenobi, who was like a father to Anakin, would have surely sensed his Padawan's strong feelings for Padme. Anyway, Padme would lie to Obi-Wan Kenobi, and she would end up getting married to Anakin on Naboo, in a private ceremony with only C-3PO and R2-D2 as witnesses. Had their marriage been public, it would have been very scandalous and all over the media. After all, this was a merger of two powerful organizations, the Jedi Order and the Republic Senate. Interestingly enough, Padme asked a monk from an ancient religious order to preside over the secret wedding. We're not really sure why Padme asked for a monk to perform the ceremony. It is possible that she could have been a spiritual person or maybe even a religious one. At the time, secular civil ceremonies were more popular on Naboo, and the ancient order she had contacted had not performed a wedding ceremony in 300 years. Eventually, the news of the wedding would reach Captain Panaka of the Royal Naboo Security Forces, who eventually informs fellow Naboo Chancellor Palpatine. Palpatine would go on to use his knowledge about Anakin's relationship with Padme to eventually convince him to join the dark side. Chapter 2. Lone Survivor. RC-1136 was a clone commander who survived the Battle of Geonosis. While casualties were extremely high across all units, the clone commandos specifically had lost almost half of their fighting force. RC-1136 had at one time been known as Darman by his brothers. Unlike normal clones, the commandos were grown and raised in pods of 4. They were more or less isolated from other clones and developed a really close bond with each other that went beyond what the average clone trooper experienced. This is an important part of clone commando training, as these units were usually inserted behind enemy lines without any support. The commandos could only really depend on each other. Darman had lost his brothers while venturing into the maze-like Geonosian catacombs, and now as the last transports pulled off of Geonosis, his squad mates were nowhere to be found. Darman was alone for the first time in his life. He was a lone survivor, and he would be placed in a new unit of 4 with other clone commandos who were lone survivors. Meanwhile, over the planet of Selachami, a Republic transport is ambushed by 2 separatist gunships and is forced to crash land. Battle droids are then sent to investigate the ruins and execute all remaining clone troopers in the area. One clone trooper named Cut manages to escape. Listed as KIA or MIA, and with all of his brothers he grew up with dead, Cut took the opportunity to slip away and desert the GAR. He would eventually start a family on Selachami and would provide a wounded Captain Rex with shelter when the war eventually arrived on the planet. These two stories paint an important picture about the war. The clones, despite all their genetic engineering and social conditioning, were very much human and were suffering from the inhuman conditions that they were being placed in by their leaders and Jedi generals. For some clones, when the opportunity presented itself, they would desert. Chapter 3. Adventures of Mace Windu. The massive losses on Geonosis and the escape of the Separatist droid army had put the Jedi Council on high alert. The Separatist forces greatly outnumber the Grand Army of the Republic and are able to quickly occupy many formerly neutral worlds. One of those worlds is Hissrich, a jungle planet located in the Outer Rim. Stretched then, Yoda decides not to deploy a normal clone unit. A more direct approach could be disastrous anyway. The Separatist force on the planet was quite large. So instead, Yoda decides to send a small Jedi task force to investigate what the Separatists are up to. Mace Windu would lead this team, which he would handpick. For a second in command, he would bring along Kit Fisto, who had fought beside him during the Battle of Geonosis. Then there was Prosed Dibs, a blind Jedi whose lack of vision forced him to be constantly tapped into the Force. His connection with the living energy was second to none. And lastly, there was Risa Mano, a talented pilot, supposedly with skills that match Plo Koon. She was also an engineer and would be a useful addition to the team. Now, even before the Jedi Task Force left on the mission, Mace Windu had expressed his concern over the recent events with other members of the Jedi Council. The Jedi Masters all sensed that something was clouding their judgment and connection with the Force, and the war was only making things worse. Unsure of what the right course of action was, Mace decides to focus on the mission at hand. Prosed Dibs also has his own reservations about the Jedi and their place on the front lines. He believes, like many others in the Order, that the Jedi did not belong on the battlefield. Amidst all the confusion and chaos, it was hard for a Force user to find their bearing, and many Jedi feared that the war would lead individuals to the dark side. Hissrich was a strange planet. Despite being a jungle world, it was covered in darkness for the majority of its cycle. Very little was known about the local inhabitants and fauna. The Jedi were going in blind just like they did on Geonosis. Piloting the West Windu modified T6 shuttle, Risa Mano skillfully performed a stealth insertion onto the planet. The team runs into a small patrol of Separatist droids and easily dispatches them, but word does reach the Separatist commander on the planet, a mercenary droid called ADW4, who actually kind of looks like Ultron. Meanwhile, after the skirmish, the Jedi attract the attention of the local inhabitants of Hissrich, who lead them to their massive underground city. The Jedi can't communicate with the locals and attempt to figure out what they know about the Separatists, but are interrupted when an army of droids come crashing through the ceiling. While Mace Windu engages the droid mercenary ADW4, the rest of the Jedi attempt to protect the local Hissrich people. During the battle, the Jedi finally uncover why the Separatists are on the planet. Due to the lack of light on the planet, the local plants were able to store a considerable amount of energy. This energy could be harvested by the Separatists into fuel. It was a huge strategic resource mining operation that needed to be stopped before it destroyed the entire planet. In the aftermath of the battle, Prosed Dibs witnessed several dead locals crushed by rock slides in the underground city. This shakes his belief in the mission. Prosed confronts Mace Windu and accuses the Jedi Council of warmongering and pursuing more power, causing civilians to die as collateral damage. Refusing to step down, Prosed then engages Mace Windu in a duel. The Jedi Master is forced to subdue Prosed and decides to spare his life and arrest him. With the task force regrouped, the Jedi carry out one last mission on the planet to take out the ship carrying all the gathered resources up into orbit and end the Separatist occupation once and for all. Mace Windu also manages to defeat ADW4 in combat. Back on Coruscant, Prosed Dibs is brought before the Jedi Council to answer for his actions. Mace Windu decides that the Jedi's actions, although out of line, were understandable. Windu shared some of the same doubts that Dibs did, but his belief in the Jedi Council and Order was stronger. He and the rest of the Council believed it was important for the Jedi to remain united during this period of war and conflict. Ultimately, Dibs was given a relatively light sentence for attacking a Jedi Council member and was sentenced to work in the library. The events surrounding Dibs and their mission to Hissrich would solidify Mace Windu's belief in the Republic and the need for order. Mace had always been a Jedi of strong resolve. His strength and character allowed him to enter conflict and war and emerge unchanged. Something that not every Jedi could actually do. He was also one of the few Jedi who was able to use Form 7 of lightsaber combat, otherwise known as Vapad. This was normally considered a dark side lightsaber form as it channeled the user's emotions, but Mace, with his discipline and self-control, was able to tap into his own inner darkness without falling to the dark side. Prosed Dibs would be the first of many Jedi to question what the Jedi Order's role in the war should be. Dibs' incredibly strong attunement to the Force meant that he was probably more sensitive to the dark side energies that were corrupting the Force. Ultimately, Jedi like Dibs were ignored by the more rigid Jedi Council. A better course of action for the Jedi Council would have been to allow the Jedi to choose whether they wanted to fight in the war or not. But after the massive casualties on Geonosis, the Jedi Council wanted everyone on board. The pressure and stress the war put on the Jedi Council blinded them from the cracks emerging amongst their ranks. Ultimately, Hissrich would be saved by the Jedi, but more worlds would fall to the Separatist threat. On the world of Christophsis, Senator Bail Organa finds himself besieged in all directions, waiting for Republic reinforcements, which is what we'll be talking about next time on our Clone Wars history series. So guys, don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on that episode. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.